Buenas noches, senores and senoritas. Welcome to the UFC 306 preview show, or as it's formerly known, the Iridia season presents Noche UFC live from the Apex, which is probably one of the most convoluted titles for an MMA event of all time. My name is Karl Bainbridge, and I'm joined this evening by the man on my right. He is the homicide to my Hernandez. He's my friend and yours. It's Joe Neal. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here after I sadly had a lot of technical issues and missed 305. But I'm glad to be here again. Glad to be the Gori Guerrero to your Blue Santo. And since it's Noche UFC, if you guys want, the fans, and you can call me by technically my real name, which is Jose Neal. But my skin tone didn't change when they gave me that. They were hoping it would. So Joe's been really easy as life has progressed. But yeah, as I said though, I missed last month. A lot of technical issues on my side. You said it was okay as I didn't break the golden rule, which was bringing up holiday fights in Australia.
Yes. Which you nearly always do, because the UFC always do these sort of like greatest moments from Australia, and I'm just thinking, mute. Like on Twitter, on my Twitter feed, it's like mute. Like November the 14th, I'll take the word home, and I'll mute that for the day, so I just don't see anything.
Yeah, I used to know what card happened there, but then you hit me with the Men in Black neuralizer during the interview. So that fight, and I believe, well, I've always believed this. I don't think Conor and Aldo ever happened. I don't remember watching it. Don't think I ever will watch it.
People always make it out. It's like Arlovsky versus Mark Hunt. It's one of those fights that everybody thinks happened, but it never did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it never happened. Weird how that happens in life. It's like they call it the Mandela effect.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of some sort of link to Nelson Mandela to the Apex, but unfortunately I'm not that quick-witted. But we are here to talk about UFC 306, which promises to be one of the most unique events in UFC history, because this one will be taking place not at the T-Mobile Arena, not at the MGM Grand, not at the, I think it was the Mandalay Bay, was the other one as well?
Yeah, he used to do Mandalay Bay
a lot. No, it's going to be taking place at the Sphere. Now, Dana White has already come out and said that he plans for this to be a one-and-done event. We'll talk about some of the reasons why. But in general, Joe, what's your sort of excitement level for the Sphere? Because there have been a lot of people who've been to the event to watch concerts, to watch stuff like that, and they do say the experience is fantastic. But I don't feel it's translating as much to combat sports fans. I think people are excited, they're curious to see what it looks like, but I think as a sporting venue, bit of an acquired taste.
So here's like the fun thing. I feel like if like a concert, you pre-plan ahead with your visual aspects of it going in, your pomp and circumstance, as we always kind of say. I think if professional wrestling performed at the Sphere, it would be insane. It would be like a WrestleMania, like another WrestleMania. I think the UFC, with how very much muted they try so hard to not be like wrestling, I kind of fear like that could hurt the experience. I also know that you can broadcast things from the Sphere, and I have this deep-rooted fear that at one point Dana White's going to be like, listen, everybody of Las Vegas, if I were to lock any one of you in a room with John Jones is walking out. I mean, he ran an ad this week on Contender Series just to talk about how awesome John Jones is. Like, those two are in love. Those two are, you know what? Maybe there is some truth to this John Jones rumor. No, I'm kidding. I couldn't keep a straight face.
One of the theories I've put forward is that I think John is steadfast about going after poor Stipe. And I think that Dana glazing him so much is maybe his way of saying, look, we do value you. We do appreciate you. Look at how amazing you are. And I think, and also as well, the simple fact, that fight does not fascinate the fans. It maybe might have done 12 months ago, when we still felt Stipe still had something left. But a year's passed, Tom Aspinall has all the hype, all the momentum behind him. And I think Dana just making a big deal about John Jones, saying, oh, look at how amazing he is the best, is his sort of desperate way to try and get fans on board. I don't think people are buying it.
Yeah, I know a couple of people, and I won't confirm or deny if I'm one of these people, that are going to boycott that event uh, and buying it because of how they're treating Tom Aspinall with this situation, and how they're treating John Jones. And by contrast, is kind of I think a lot of it though is I think it's a lot of pettiness. I could see your point of view. I never thought of it that way, but I think you could also add in the pettiness of Dana White as he hates Ngannou for demanding more than $40 a fight, and he hates GSP because GSP became such a big star that he could just kind of do whatever he wanted, and Dana couldn't control him. Like Dana likes to tell people what's best for their career. He doesn't like for fighters to think on their own what's best for their career, and GSP did that. So with a GOAT contender, like widely considered the GOAT in George St. Pierre, and like the at the time number one heavyweight in the world leaving the company like that, definitely made him salty. And so to be petty, he's like, well, John Jones would have just killed anyone anyway, so it doesn't matter. Like, John Jones is also the greatest ever. He's better than GSP too. I think GSP is kind of catching a stray, as they say here. And this is a lot of just this is more anti-Ngannou propaganda.
And as well, that PFL event, that's going to be taking place a few weeks before Jones at MSG.
Mm-hmm. I'm watching that.
I'm thinking about doing a preview show for it. Of course, if you're up for it.
I'm absolutely down.
Yeah.
I'd rather do that than the one for the John Stevens. We should make it a vote. Oh my god! Like, we could make it a vote if we really.
I mean, about 10 people will watch the PFL preview show, but I'm definitely up for doing it.
Oh, absolutely! That sounds so much fun. Mostly because I think, I think we should support guys who take that gamble risk to do what's actually best for their career. I applaud. I think Francis Ngannou is an incredibly commendable guy for all his charity work and for doing this, which can only help the fighters in the long term. I don't care what DC and Dana say. DC is too much of a company guy to admit anything's wrong with the UFC.
It's appropriate you're bringing up money, because that's the next thing I want to talk about in regards to the Sphere card. A lot of the controversy surrounding the show has been the ticket prices. Like, I'm seeing like $5,000 for some of the best seats in the house, and those prices have substantially dropped as we got closer to the event, which the UFC always like to make a big deal about all their events being sellouts. I think they kind of mangle the numbers a little bit to try and make every event a sellout. I've seen a lot of empty seats for supposedly sold out events. Mm-hmm. And do you feel like the UFC are kind of falling into the trap boxing did, where it's becoming more of a, like, it's an event for the elitists rather than, because that was one of the big things that Dana always made a point of in the earlier, so 2004. Like, we are the sport for the people. Boxing's becoming too corporate, too lovey.
That's fair. Well, I think I think he was riding that counterculture wave, which was smart. If he wasn't being genuine back then, he was definitely just riding the counterculture wave that kind of started with that shock wave of counterculture in the 90s and kind of had an effect in the 2000s. But I feel like, I wonder how much of this is the UFC going like, it's not just the Sphere, it's us at the Sphere. And how much of it is the Sphere being like, yeah, we're only going to give you X% on the sales of all this stuff for your event. So the UFC, in an effort to make the same profit margins, they had to raise the prices insanely. Like, I'm kind of wondering where the fault lies in that. But I will say, that is incredibly BS prices. Like, they're horrid. Like, me and my best friend, he'll jokingly act like a Sean O'Malley mega fan, and I love showing him things like Sean O'Malley's post-fight talk in the cage, the YouTube numbers, and then I'll show him Sean Strickland's numbers. I'll be like, Sean Strickland is a bigger star than Sean O'Malley, and he doesn't like that. It's super funny. But I would think it'd be kind of funny if the Sphere, the event Dana White said will be the best night in combat sports history, isn't sold out, because then I can just make fun of Sean O'Malley for not being a star.
And you know that Dana is going to look at the gate and think, oh, this is proof that Sean O'Malley is a star. Look, he's pulled the highest grossing, but that's because you're raising the ticket prices to ridiculous levels.
Yeah. What's the average it out? Like, you got to average it out per person.
Like, and that's one of the things that sort of doesn't really sit well with me, is that I can't help but feel that a lot of this event is a let's get Sean O'Malley over, sort of like their vehicle to try and do it.
Yeah, this is UFC. This could be WrestleMania 32, potentially. You know?
It was definitely Roman. Was it Roman Brock?
That was Roman. Roman Triple H.
Yes.
Yeah, people say the worst ever.
Was that the one where people were walking out the arena and just booed the whole thing?
Yeah. That's I always think of Matthew on Botchamania, like doing the Faith No More song. I speak at once constant volume, and you still won't hear. And then just like hard cuts to the crowd, like the loudest crowd I've ever heard boo, being slowly, definitely in the production van, the volume getting turned down on them, like so blatantly.
So let's talk about this card in a little bit more detail. Now, one of the things that people have noted, and it probably is because of the cost of the Apex, we've got far less fights, I should say, which are taking place than normal. Normally, you get about 14 or 15 fights as stacked prelims. This time around, we've only got 10 fights. You can see the prelims on your screen right now. And as expected, with it being Noche UFC, sort of leaning into the sort of Mexican theme, we've got a lot of Hispanic talent on the undercard. Are there any particular names that stand out for you?
First, I gotta say, I actually really like the idea of less fights on cards. I think that sounds fun. I especially would like that on Apex fights, Apex cards, because that means there's 3 to 4 less fights of non-importance that I don't have to torture myself to watch. But on a serious note, Ignacio Bahamondes, I like watching him fight. He's super fun, a lot of kicks. He's like a 6'2", 6'3" lightweight, which is insane. Yasmin, was it Howard?
I think it's Howard.
Maybe. My mom told me once how to pronounce it, and it's that she even had like a, Spanish being her first language had a, whoa, that's a weird one. So I know the UFC really hyped up on her, even though she had Denise Gomez got the 20-second finish on her. But the UFC, Denise Gomez is also pretty decent, so it makes sense. There's that.
I've been a bit confused by how the UFC have sort of treated Howard since then, because I think especially, she came into the UFC with a lot of fanfare. The Gomez fight happens, which was a massive setback, and we can't sort of shield away from that. But I just find it strange that she's sort of stuck in sort of prelim limbo, and yet the girl that she beat, Lucindo, she gets the ranked fight with Carolina. She's, I believe, going to be fighting. She's going to be fighting someone near or around the top 5 for her next match. It's all like she's getting the big push, and not the girl that beat her.
Yeah. It's funny, I know both had hype on them, but the chick that definitely cleanly beat her, it's kind of weird. But I think they put her on this to be like, I don't think they're putting her on this card to be like, you're Mexican, get on here. Which they're definitely doing for some names on this card. But I think they're also putting her on here as of like, well, we still care about you, of course.
But
they got
Aldana being on the prelims is a little bit questionable.
That's kind of the same boat. I feel like that's in the same boat of like, we still care about you, like you're still on the card.
Do you think
and same with like Raul Rosas Jr.
I was very surprised by that, because he has a little bit of a reputation of being a bit of a Dana White pet. So I was fully expecting him to be on the main card.
Yeah, he's definitely got Dana White privilege for sure. I thought he was going to be on the main card when they announced him on it, but he's opening up the card, and I went, is this like an overcorrection, or are you afraid if you put him on the main card of a pay-per-view, is he just going to get smoked again? Like, is that like a weird not supernatural, superstitious kind of?
Or maybe it's a nerves thing, because he
Yeah.
was supposed to have that fight with, I think it was Ricky Tercios in Mexico.
Yeah, who he beat.
And
Oh, and his dad grounded him as the joke.
that's the joke, but apparently he had a massive panic attack. And I can imagine, like, main
Yeah.
card of the Apex show for a young lad like that, we might just have another situation.
Someone who has had multiple panic attacks. I had one. My first one ever was like full on Tony Soprano in it. You know, and almost hit my head on the back of a kitchen counter. It was kind of scary, but I do sympathize with that because of my history with them. So I definitely sympathize with it. But I think he should save face and just say his dad grounded him. I think that's so funny. Like, I don't care if he's in the UFC. He didn't know the yard like he asked him to. It's so funny.
And that's why I've got an allotment in my back garden. I don't need to mow any lawns.
Oh, my yard is overgrown. I got to get the guy out here to do it. Yeah.
So anything else that is of note for you before we move on to the main card?
We brought up Aldana, but we could bring up Norma Dumont. I always think of whenever I saw this fight, I instantly was reminded of a fight that kind of reminds me of it in a sense. Caitlin Chukagian and Manon Farrow. Do you remember what you called the subtitle?
Yeah, it was the Battle of the British Tens.
Yes, this fight, Norma Dumont and Irene Aldana, is the battle of the MMA tens. I think because I was like, these are pretty chicks, like I especially Norma Dumont. You know? But I think Aldana's attractive, and so I was like this is the next step above, like, or a couple steps above, I think, of the Chukagian Manon Farrow fight. But other than that, like, we got Bahamondes. I think the only fight on here where I'm not like, oh, I know these guys, I'm excited, is the Joshua Van Edgar Chairez fight.
Josh Van had a little bit of fanfare around him, and then Charles Johnson pulls off. Like, a lot of people are going to forget what a big upset that was when Charles Johnson beat Josh Van.
It's a huge upset. Yeah. Because I got to that fight when I was researching. I was like, who is it? And I was like, oh, yeah. Because that's the near backflip, isn't it?
I think...
No, I'm thinking of another fight. But yeah, he had a lot of...
Charles Johnson's a G. Charles Johnson is a G. Like, if you want somebody for your boys' stable, Charles Johnson is a perfect guy.
Undeniably perfect for the boys' stable. He is a fantastic guy. But that, I mean, like, admittingly, like I said earlier, I almost kind of prefer less fights on a card. I mean, if you're a paying customer live, especially paying $5,000 for a seat, if you kind of want to break it down and how much does each fight how much money am I spending per fight upset? But in this sense, as a, even me as a pay-per-view buyer, it's like, that's kind of annoying, I guess. But at the same time, as a consumer, it's a lot easier. And that means you don't have, like, man, all these fights are awesome, except these 4 random fights that don't matter. Like, it's, I'm very okay with trimming the fat, in MMA, especially right now with how over bloated the UFC is.
Even if they're unranked strawweights.
Well, I mean, they can stay. Yeah, they can stay.
Demopoulos versus Amarine. Get in there.
Elise Reed, Demopoulos 5. Let's go. Sam Hughes fights the winner. And I think let's cut half the unranked heavyweights, half the unranked light heavyweights, and half the ranked unranked middleweights. And maybe the welterweight. No, welterweight's decent enough that they're just on probation. After that, we have the good in women's bantamweight. Sadly, we got to cut all that out.
How dare you?
I'm sorry. I'm not. If your division, peaked, the division peaked when the Lioness was champion. Clearly,
that's me texting you to show loads of expletives.
Oh my god! Like, you have a sniper on me. I mean, it was peaked when Ronda was There. Um, no, women's bantamweight still struggles.
It is in a bad place right now, in all
It's been
seriousness.
it's been struggling for a long time.
Like, Chelsea Chandler's ranked and has never fought at 135.
That's my favorite statistic right now in MMA. Oh my god, that's a really fun trivia night question.
One
Uh,
division you didn't mention, though, was flyweight. And that's why we're going to be talking about our opening fight on the main card here. And it is Ronaldo Rodriguez, who's going to be taking on Ode Osborne. I do believe it is Ronaldo because it's Spanish language rather than Portuguese. Because I think
yeah,
they pronounce it Ronaldo.
yeah, it's gonna be an R sound.
Yep.
So like what I will.
We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about some of the prelim fights. Why do you think the UFC have chosen this fight in particular to open up this sort of groundbreaking historic show? Because you would have expected it to have been, say, Aldana versus Demont because it's ranked, Rosas because he has like the Dana White vehicle behind him. Why do you think they've gone with Rodriguez versus Osborne?
So Rodriguez smashes guys. Like he's a flyweight finisher. He's got a pretty solid win streak on him. And Odie Osborne is a name that's been on main cards before. And I personally believe that in their mindset, it's either going to be a great showing because Ronaldo's an action fighter and Odie Osborne's on a 2-fight losing streak. Like I think he's like 1-4 in his last 5 or something like that, right? He's had a rough streak of things. In their mind, they're like, okay, either we got a new star at flyweight, or Odie Osborne, with his back to the wall, is in do or die mode, and we have a great fight. I personally, I'm okay with this being on the main card. I just don't know how I feel about it being the opener. I think it's always dangerous putting flyweights as the opener, personally, because they're gonna make like if you watch like heavyweights in the opener, you're not gonna watch the next fights and go, oh, the knockout power just isn't there. Instead, you're saying, wow, these other divisions are faster and they're not tired after 10 seconds. You know, and having flyweight, the fastest division, opening up, the next fight is lightweight and then featherweight. Fast divisions in their own right, absolutely, but not to the level flyweights are. So it's probably I think it's risky to do it in this order, but I think that's my justification for it being on the main card. I'm okay with it being on the main card with that justification, but it does make more sense to have Aldana and Norma Dumont on here. But but they might have also watched Norma Dumont fights, which
that's the problem. Well, there was a lot of people calling her Norma Mikhaev after her last fight.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean. She's a fighter that you love seeing her on the card. You love watching her during fight week. You just don't watch her fight.
I know why, you horn dog.
Listen. It's INC fans and me. We're one and the same. After that, like
I was going to say you've got Grasso coming up on the main card. Keep it in your pants.
She's a. I'm not gonna say that comment you saw. I don't have it in me to say it. Not on camera.
Let's try and keep this PG, Joe. You did say something there, though, and I actually think there's two schools of thought when it comes to the opening fight on the main card, because you could either take the approach that Elite XC and Strikeforce would do, where they would have like a big heavyweight or light heavyweight fight opening up the main card, so you're sort of guaranteed a knockout, get the crowd excited. So they'd always put someone like Brett Rogers was always opening Elite XC cards. Or you kind of do the whole WCW approach, or the TNA approach, where you get the faster, lower weight guys who are just going to do this sort of like acrobatic spot fest, high action excitement. There's always two approaches you can take, I feel.
And you get pumped up in a wrestling show, you know. I think maybe because it's been the TNA in me, you know, watching TNA a lot recently because of OSW. But it's really hard for me to go from like X Division's so awesome. What's the next match? Martin Bashir versus Kevin Nash. Like, oh my god, Big Daddy Cool Kevin Nash gonna throw a big boot side slam jackhammer and over 20 minutes. Like, So I think that's kind of the vibe. Is,
So we'll talk about Rodriguez here. So 16-2 record. This is going to be his second fight in the UFC. His first came at the last Mexico card, where he beat Dennis Bondar, which was a second round submission, I believe. So unbeaten since he lost in the Contender Series back in 2020. Alternated wins and losses in his past 6 before then. 7 KOs, 5 submissions. A lot of mileage though for a 25-year-old, because if you take into account both his professional and his amateur fights, he's had over 40 matches. That's a lot of damage for a guy who's quite young in his career.
Yeah, he 25. I I feel like this is I feel like it's like a negative cultural thing that kind of comes from boxing. Because boxing, as a lot of people know, is huge in Mexico. And, you have guys like Julio Cesar Chavez and the late, great Salvador Sanchez, who they had unbelievable amount of fights. Like, Salvador Sanchez died at 23, right? And I think he had like 30, 40 fights. And it's just kind of like a thing culturally that Mexican fighters will do. They'll just take every fight. Why not? Who cares about healing? But the problem is that wears on you, and it makes the decline worse on you whenever your physical prime ends. I have a little bit of worry about that here too.
Someone said something, I think it might have been Randy Couture, someone like that. They said that there's a big difference between physical age and fighter age.
Yeah.
Whereby if you start your career later or you don't take as much damage, you can extend that into your mid-40s, because that was something that Randy did. Like, I think he started MMA around about 34. And then on the opposite side, you have people like Renan Barão, who fought a lot as a young man and was washed by the time he was 32.
Yeah, he was what, he was I think 30, 31 when TJ beat him, maybe younger. And, but no one talked about it. In fight years, he was at least 1,000. It's like Shogun. Shogun at the end of his career wasn't even 40. People always forget. Wasn't even 40 years old. And it's like, dude, in fight years, that guy's like 50. Like, that guy didn't just fight in pride. He went to war in pride. It wasn't like a KJ Noon situation where KJ Noon's was a weird MMA history. KJ Noon's of the Don't Be Scared Homie infamy, it was signed by Pride, was gifted, and at their award ceremony, they gave him Striker of the Year before he ever fought a round in Pride. It wasn't like that situation for him. It was like, Shogun fought Rampage. He went to Arona, Overeem twice. He fought a ton in Pride. And then by the time he got to the UFC, he was slowing down already, but he was still the man. And so at the end of his career, he's just a shell of himself.
It was one of the videos I did this year, actually. I looked at Shogun's UFC tenure. One of the least watched videos I've done so far.
It's because of the skateboard. Skateboarding isn't popular, I think, among MMA fans. Because everybody knows he tried doing that ollie or whatever in the OSP fight. I always love it. You even edited that in.
I even edited that in.
Yeah. I was I love that meme so much. It was just a skateboard. He tripped.
Yeah. So 2 fighters in this matchup. It's not just Rodriguez. We also have Ode Osbourne. Now, as mentioned before, he is coming into this fight with 3 losses from his past 4. The last one coming against Jafel Filio, which was on the Tuivasa versus Tibura card. God, Martin Tibura had 2 main events this year.
Yeah. And he beat Tai Tuivasa.
Yeah. How? Because Tuivasa doesn't know how to wrestle.
That's true. Yeah. That's incredibly accurate.
Yeah. So, Ode Osbourne, as you mentioned before, he's one of those guys who just you always see him around on a lot of the main cards. And I think he was actually was he on the main card of Conor vs. Cowboy?
No, he was on the... Is that when he got choked out by... No, he was on the prelims.
Yeah, he fought Kelleher. He was definitely fought Kelleher on one of the big main cards.
I think he was on the that was his debut, I believe, or maybe like his second fight in. But I know he was on the main card, I believe, of uh, Derek Lewis Cyril Gahn against Manel Cape.
That was when Cape did the flying knee, wasn't it?
Yeah, nasty KO. You know,
So I just kind of fear he's kind of become one of those guys who he's
known for
one of
the
those sort of like 10K fighters who you just put them on there as kind of a sacrificial lamb, like jobbers as well.
yeah. He's a good hand, but he's kind of closer to jobber than he's closer to a Taka Michinoku outside of cruiserweight than he is to
I was going to say
a
Pete
Val
Gas.
Venus. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
I just love the Mean Street Posse, as you could tell from the attire.
Ah, that's fair. I like Tyson Nam had a really slick KO against him, and then but he got a win over who we said is incredibly boy material, Charles Johnson. Um, that said, you know, I think they're kind of wondering if, like, I feel like for him it's like this is probably do or die, you know, and he is good. I'm not going to say that he is like a Pete Gas level in reality. I think he's good. I just think that he there's just something missing. Like something hasn't clicked for him. He's a little hittable, and his grappling isn't great, but it's not enough to like. He's good enough to stay employed forever. I feel like, and so him being in danger of being fired is a little odd to me for a guy of his ability. But maybe Flyweight's just that cutthroat crazy, you know. Flyweight's awesome, so.
There's a real lottery. I feel like when you're in the sort of, especially the unranked flyweights, anyone can beat anyone.
It's like a Pokemon battle, rock, paper, scissors type of thing.
Yeah. You mentioned before there, I think you touched on one of the big weaknesses I've identified with Ode Osborne, which is it's the grappling.
Yeah,
Because he has the reach. It's a very sort of gangly stand-up style, so I think that unless you know your P's and Q's, he can very well catch you with something. We've seen him, was it Adeshev? I think he knocked out in about 60 seconds, something like that. Really good KO.
Yeah, he like blasted him and then just, yeah.
So he knows how to use his reach, but you get this guy down, he just seems clueless. And that's strange to me because he does have a wrestling base. I just don't think he knows how to fight off his back.
It's fair. Kind of a Justin Gaethje scenario. Turtle.
Yeah.
Turtle on his back. Yeah.
You sometimes get that with a lot of wrestlers, though. I think the jiu-jitsu guys, obviously, they know how to fight off their back. With wrestlers, you seldom find yourself in that position.
I mean, like, it's like a lot of, what's it called? Team Alpha Male. One of our favorites, running jokes of just Team Alpha Male in general on this channel. But they struggled with being on their back for a while until they finally brought in a jiu-jitsu guy. I remember that in like WEC era. And Joey B, the best champion to never have a belt because of his wife.
Lucky man. She's a pretty girl.
Him and Cub Swanson, incredibly lucky dudes, man. James Krause too.
Yes, I think that went pear-shaped for James.
Oh man, I shouldn't have brought that up. I couldn't keep it straight.
Oh, trust me, when the time's right, there will be a James Krause video at some point.
Oh man, I still think about Gloria. I don't want to get too off topic. I think about that almost every other week.
We'll keep this on topic then.
I think though he. This is when I remember what I was thinking of, Odie Osborne. He kind of reminds me of in a way. He kind of reminds me of if you flip what they're really good at in their early stages of their career, it kind of reminds you a little bit of like Randy Brown.
I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, they're both from the same part of the world, which is kind of funny. But like Randy Brown was like he could kind of strike, but he's pretty good at grappling. Whereas like Odie Osborne is like, oh, he's pretty good at striking. He can kind of grapple unless you put him on his back. I think Odie Osborne's a little hittable, though. That's kind of something I fear. I think when shorter than you Manel Cape is baiting you into a flying knee, which is awesome, honestly. um, from Manil Cape, awesome stuff for his. I think that means you're a little hittable because you're the taller, longer guy. Getting blasted by that, I think it's a little harder to get blasted from it. So he found a way.
It's a concern as well when you look at Rodriguez and the type of fighting style he has. Big looping left hand, targets the body quite frequently, and a very good pressure fighter. Like, that was the big thing that stood out for me when I watched his fight with Bondar. Yeah. Normally you expect flyweights to be sort of like all action, like flies buzzing around, fast paced. He fights almost sort of like a middleweight or welterweight. Yeah. It's just like forward pressure, keeps it quite steady. And that can maybe be a positive because you sort of like have that power to deal with. Mm-hmm. But then again, being slow in a weight class like this can also hurt.
He reminds me of what's that old boy who got tapped out by, just recently tapped out by, was it Vitor Petrino? Was his name?
Choked out by Smith.
Yeah, yes. Anthony Smith tapped out. Kind of reminds me of like Vitor Petrino a bit, in how he fights. But I don't actually have this as a note, but you talked about like the tank kind of style, that Mexican pressure fighter kind of thing, attacking the body. The flyweight had a pretty scary champion that kind of fought similar. He's nowhere near that level. I'm not saying that yet, but Davis and Figueiredo wasn't a finesse-based flyweight either, and he had a great run at flyweight.
Like, I would have looked, like, everyone's talked about Mighty Mouse recently, and we'll talk about Mighty Mouse a lot on Uncaged. Yeah. I would love to have seen Mighty Mouse versus Figgy.
Oh my god. Dude, if Mighty Mouse versus Figgy or Prime Moreno or Pantoja. Oh man. Yeah, it's like, because he was still at the top level. Like, he was just at least 2 or 3 in the world. At flyweight still, I think, personally. But yeah, I'm genuine. Who do you got here? Because this one's a curious one for me. This one took me the longest to think about.
I think the grappling limitations of Osborne are going to come to the fore. I could see Osborne maybe trying to have some success early on because Rodriguez, he is quite slow. He does, in my opinion, have quite porous defense. I think especially if you catch him on the counter, he does sort of like eat it and keep walking forward. But I think that pressure and I think the lack of a grappling game from Osborne are going to pay dividends. So I'm going to say Rodriguez, second round sub.
I think Osborne has the tools to make this the perfect fight for him, where he's going to have to like mind his P's and Q's, as you always say. But he's the longer, he's the lankier, he's the faster and more technical striker. He can fight with snap kicks, long jabs, straight shots up the middle, and even uppercuts at knees to kind of counter the level changes and body work attacks of Rodriguez. That said, I think the path to victory for Rodriguez is easier than the path to victory for Osborne.
Yes.
So I have to lean Osborne as well. I'm going to say second round submission, probably third round.
So we're both,
because he has submissions as well.
So we're both on the same boat there.
Yeah, I think I would not be shocked if Ody Osborne wins, or if he even gets a finish, because he does hit quite hard. He's a good counter striker.
Fighters taking an easy path to victory. Take no Khalil Roundtree.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he tried his best. Okay, he popped hot, and they still let him fight. The most insane thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
You're angrier about that because of the failed steroid test. Most people think it's because Ankalaev's getting passed over.
I'm mad about both, but I'm less mad about the steroid test but I'd rather talk about that so I don't, challenge Dana White to a fist fight on Twitter.
He'll just talk about John Jones.
Yeah, well, I'll tell him. I'll be like, listen, Joe, if we go into a room together, John Jones somehow appears and walks out.
Do you think it's like a Beetlejuice situation? He says John Jones like 3 times in a mirror, he pops up.
I hope not, man. I like Michael Keaton. I have a friend who watched both of them in the same day because the second one just came out. And he was like, I had no idea that first one was so good. I'm like, yeah, that first one's awesome. It gave me a childhood crush on Winona Ryder that stays to this day.
Good man. Man of taste.
Yeah. I watched Stranger Things for her originally.
So we're going to be going to fight number 2 before Joe goes into Alexa Grasso territory. And we've got a lightweight bout coming up here. It is Daniel Zellhuber who is going to be taking on Esteban Ribovic. Zellhuber, again, another guy that could very well be Mexico's breakout star. And I think this is really good matchmaking between the two because you look at the two fighters, very similar in terms of the way they compete. In some ways, they kind of represent the best and the worst, in my opinion, of the Contender Series. Where you've got like raw strikers, a lot of action, a lot of aggression, but they're still lacking the flaws that sort of make fighters elite. So I think in some ways it's a good thing because obviously we're getting entertaining fighters on what some people still feel is an entertainment product. But are we getting top tier elite martial artists? Or just fun guys who brawl?
I think we're probably getting mostly fun guys. I mean, we've had great people come out of the Contender Series. Like, Jamal Hill was a champion out of the Contender Series. We've had a couple of different champions out of the Contender Series. Like Adrian Yanez was looking like he was going to be one. Sean O'Malley, even a Contender Series. But they're so few and far between. And I am of the firm belief, I believe that conspiracy theory, that the Contender Series is there. So they're, instead of paying giant money, hoping for like free agents when they come out, like just sitting around waiting for free agents, or sitting around waiting for feeder leagues to have a champion that wants to move up. They're just hiring a ton of people, like for like these dumb 7-7 contracts, so they can fill up Apex fight cards, so they can fill their quota with Disney.
That's the approach I think as well. And the thing is it creates a sort of 2-tier sort of recruitment process where you've got all of the cheap Apex guys who come in through the Contender Series and the elite superstars, and you don't have those middle guys. You don't have like the Corey Andersons, the Phil Davises, the Ryan Baders of the world.
Yeah, the good old days. Like we're missing out on the fun mid card. You know? We're
reminiscing about the Reebok era. You know what that means, don't you?
Well, I'm reminiscing about the mid card era. I'm reminiscing about Ryan Bader. You know, that's sad. The easiest fight in the light heavyweight division. One line by DC just killed everything he had going for him.
The ironic thing is, prime Ryan Bader probably steamrolls Pereira.
It's funny. It's really funny to think. Does he though? Because Ryan Bader, I'm going to say this as a pseudo fan of Ryan Bader. Ryan Bader's fight IQ is amongst the lowest I've ever seen in a fighter ever. He fights like my best friend told me once, Ryan Bader fights like Cody Garbrandt talks. I mean, this is a guy who fought Machida and was like, you know what? I can't get close at him. I should run at him with my chin up in the air and both arms out. Like, what? Against Machida? Like, and then he was like, I'm going to fight Anthony Johnson by shooting a takedown from the entire length of the octagon away. And that worked out fantastic for him. I mean, Ryan Bader has a skill set to have the easiest 50-42 of his life against Pereira. But I feel like there's going to be a moment where it's like, he's kicked my leg pretty hard. You know what I should do? I should run at him with my hands down. You know, that's another one. He was fighting old boy Fedor's protege,
Nemkov. Yeah,
he was fighting Nemkov. Nemkov is spamming head kicks, hitting him. And what's his mid-fight adjustment for it? I should drop my hands. Like, you know what? Honestly, perfect description. He fights like Garbrandt talks. Oh, man.
And that's the kind of stuff that you can get on INC Uncaged, patreon.com/it's not Cagefighting.
free preview, people. Think about that. You're welcome.
Let's try and get our focus back onto this one here. We'll talk about Daniel Zellhuber first off. So he also fought on that Mexico card earlier in the year. He got a win over Francisco Prado. Notable wins in the UFC include Lando Venata, Christoph Giagos, as well as Prado. Now, his only loss came on his UFC debut against Trey Ogden, who's one of those sort of grizzled vets who, if you're not ready, he can easily just grind out a win against you. 7 KOs, 3 submissions, trains with Extreme Couture. A lot of hype around this guy. Do you think it's worth it?
Man, he fights a lot different than his record would look, I feel like. I saw his record. I saw, like, little over half wins by, like, KO and, and all that. A good amount of submissions. And it seemed like he was going to have, like, a pretty super rounded game. Man, he's pretty fun on the feet, but his wrestling seems pretty good, too, though. Like, he seems like a better... And then, I didn't see the Extreme Couture thing. That makes perfect sense. No, I think this guy has upside. I'm always a little skeptical to just go and start a hype train on you guys. I got to be honest, the Adrian Yanez one, who can still bounce back because he's young enough, but that one hurt. So, because that guy did seem like the dude, This guy, he could have it. I think he looks good. If you look at his wins, I have the link to it here. It's like, yeah, he's got Thai clinch knee victory, like Muay Thai wins with like kneeing dudes up in the clinch. He's got triangle choke, so he can win off his back. He's got submissions. He has one in the UFC with the Anaconda. He had a lot of finishes beforehand, which, to be fair, none of us are calling Alexa Grasso like a power hitter, but she had a ton of finishes by knockout before her UFC debut. So sometimes it just doesn't translate from the minor league. Like if you're a finisher on the minor leagues, it doesn't transfer over into the UFC.
I've heard a lot of higher-ups say that one of the big things that you do find fighting on the regional scene is not so much a skill set issue, it's a durability and a composure issue, because one of the big reasons why you get so many finishes at that level is because some people just nope out at the first sign of resistance.
Yeah.
So it kind of deceives the record a little bit.
I think so too. That makes sense. I mean, I think Belal Muhammad even has a finish on the region.
John Fitch does.
Yeah, John Fitch has a knockout KO. It's awesome. John Fitch, power in his hands.
I also think Fitch has one of the few upkick knockouts in UFC history. I think it's him and Nico Price.
There's another one I always think of too, but I think those are the two in the UFC. There's one in Dream that Slacky's favorite fighter, Hagar. Yeah, he hit on Jacare, and he hits him. Jacare's like trying to do that really cool Fedor-esque, move the legs and come in shot. And as he goes for it, Mousasi throws up 2 kicks, and one hits him, and then the other one hits him in midair to like definitely flatten him. It's kind of wild, and that's why they have the rematch in the UFC.
Does Aldana versus Macy count as a upkick knockout as well?
That counts to me. Actually, it's a good point. Yeah, that counts. So there's 3. I think 3.
I think there's only been 3.
The Nico Price one's kind of insane. Because Nico Price just likes finishing guys off his back.
I think it's because it's James Vick as well. Because Vick kind of, especially after the Gagey fight, he kind of got tarred a little bit of as a James Vick, what a joke he is.
Yeah.
For that,
it's so unfun,
for that to happen to him, you kind of felt bad for him. It's just like another James Vick sort of blemish to sort of mock him for, and I kind of feel bad for him, but at the same time I understand why.
Yeah, he made himself unlikable. I think he willingly did that, and it just didn't work out. We've seen it happen 1,000 times. But the thing about his case that sucks is James Vick was good. Like, he was actually pretty good. He only had his one loss was to Beneil Dariush, who has power. And if he would have been fine after the Gaethje fight, it's like, okay, you got knocked out by the 2 arguably two hardest pure hitters in the division at the time. Like, that's not the end of the world, you know.
Also, I think he was Lloyd Irvin trained as well, which is another
Oh,
mark
yeah,
against him.
Well, never mind.
Yep.
I don't feel bad at all.
So we'll talk about...
Don't ask where Gustafson and Dominic Cruz's jiu-jitsu belts came from.
We'll talk about Esteban Ribovic now. So he enters this fight as well. A little bit of fanfare around him, largely due to what he did to Terence McKinney back in May 2024, earlier this year. 13-1 record. Only loss is to Loic Radzahabov, who I think took that one on short notice. Very sort of Radzahabov kind of works of like get him on the ground. And Ribovic, I think his takedown defense was lacking during that fight. That's one of the big marks against him. Yeah. Where do you stand on Ribovic? Do you think he got back a lot of his hype with the win over McKinney?
Yes and no. Seeing McKinney lose by finish is scary to me. Like, so it's almost to the point where it sadly kind of overshadows the opponent. I have to kind of step away from it and analyze it, because McKinney has a lot of concussions at such a young age, a lot of violent strikes he's taking. But yeah, you know, I think he looks pretty fun, admittingly long term. He's probably never going to be a world beater, but I hope he sticks around because this guy seems super fun to have on the cards. I wish that Elvis Brenner fight went through.
That would have been amazing. I love Brenner.
Yeah. He's so much fun.
Like, honestly, that Guram fight last year, that may be one of my favorite fights of 2023.
That was in my maybe top 5.
Because, I mean...
If I thought...
Because, I mean, he was getting walloped in that match, but just the amount of willpower to just stay in the fight. And he broke Guram. Because Guram was just like, what else do I need to do to finish this guy?
Reminds you of, does it remind you of, like, Backdick Elkins?
Good one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the best ones. But I thought you were going to say your favorite fight was Trevor Peake, Homer Bart Simpson's punching.
If you get hit, it's your own fault.
Yeah, I got to be honest, though. He has a really acclaimed boxing coach. I don't know if you saw. She's a former champion in the UFC.
Mrs. Pena?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He fought last night, and he still threw stupid punches, and it made me laugh. I out loud laughed. But he's super boy material because of how dumb fun he is. But I like Ribovic a lot. I'm hoping he doesn't disappoint me like Claudio Puelles did.
That was a bad one.
Man, he looked so good. And we both picked him to beat Dan Hooker.
I just thought a lanky guy like that, who has limitations on the ground, I could have seen Puelles like locking up a leg.
Yeah, well, Puelles also wasn't, like, in prior fights we had seen him in, he didn't look lost and just terrified of striking. Like, he was okay at it. He was definitely still learning it, but he was building confidence in it. So I thought, okay, he's at least going to try and work some of his game, but then mostly try and take it to the ground, right? And it's like, no. I'm going to go full on. I'm going to go full on Kron Gracie in the Charles Jourdain fight with this. It's like, oh no. Or was it Nick Serra? Matt Serra's brother?
The guy who got disqualified for... I love this. If you actually go on to Sherdog and you look up Nick Serra and you look at the reason he lost his fight in Elite XC, it's disqualification, refused to get up from butt scoot.
Yeah. It's insane. And because he was exhausted and he couldn't get the fight to the ground. So he was like, I'm not getting up. Come on, you have to get up. I'm not getting up. He just sat there, stare at the ref, and it's like, okay, fine, you're done. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, honestly.
You might call Puelles a bit of a one-trick pony because of his leg locks.
Yeah.
Could you maybe say the same thing about Ribovic? 5 of his first 6 wins came by Kimura. Now, he has gone quite strike-heavy since then, But that's something that a lot of people are looking for, especially if Zellhuber tries to take this to the mat. Ribovic using the Kimura to either sweep or get the submission.
It's a good move too. I think if anyone was to be a specialist on the ground, I don't see why. If you're confident in your strength, then I don't see why. Like, Kimura is a solid move for that. He doesn't seem incredibly strong, so he must just like it for the fact that you can kind of hit it from like a ton of positions. Was it Krzysztof Soszinski? Old fighter back in the day, right? Krzysztof Soszinski, he was a Kimura specialist, right? That dude was super strong. And I remember him talking about it, and it kind of convinced me of like, yeah, that's a great submission to specialize in. Like, we've seen tons of guillotine specialists. Cody from Tough with GSP's team.
McKenzie.
Well, Cody McKenzie, yeah. Joe Daddy Stevenson. Everyone at Team Alpha Male. Like basically everyone there. We've seen a lot of guillotine specialists. And that's a good move too, I think. But Kimura specialists you just don't see enough of, so I would love to see more of those. Because you can just hit. There's like 15 different ways I can think of at the top of my head, or you can hit it. And if you don't get it, you can also use it to sweep. You can use it to force a scramble if your opponent's content to just lay on you. It's a pretty solid one. He might go for it like a couple times against Zellhuber, but it's definitely a strength on strength submission, because it's both of your arm strengths against his one arm, essentially. Obviously, there's a little bit more to it, but that's always how I've always thought of it as. I notoriously have very little arm strength, even when I grappled, so I wasn't a Kimura guy. I was more of an Americana guy because I could cheat and just put my whole body into it. But yeah, I mean, if he's confident in that, for sure. I mean, now he's just striking and blasting guys.
And looking good with the striking as well.
Yeah, he's not just like a brawler. He's looking pretty clean. He's kind of varied in his attacks. He'll kick legs, head, and body. Love seeing that. He doesn't punch the body as much as I thought. I was hoping he would, but his punches look good. He's got oomph on him. This fight, I'm not picking it to be fight of the night, but it probably could be. Like, this is probably the sleeper pick.
It's my pick, personally.
Yeah. Okay.
I just think that these guys' styles could have a very good chance of complementing one another. And I think we could see that sort of fan-friendly slugfest.
I think you can see. I think I agree with you. I almost went into my prediction with what I was going to say next, so I cut myself off. But yeah, I'm right there with you.
So which way are you going to be leaning with this one?
I was coming into this on Ribovic, right? But after both of us kind of talking about it, I think I'm going to go Zellhuber by decision in a fight of the night contender. Because I think Zellhuber I think in the striking, it's going to be close with Ribovic having the edge. But I think Zellhuber having the ability to change levels is probably going to be a big factor here. He's probably a little more rounded. It's kind of similar to the first fight, which is there's more avenues to victory for Zellhuber here.
I'm leaning towards Zellhuber by decision. I just think he's slightly more well-rounded. I do think that there's some concerns about Zellhuber's chin. We saw Giagos proper crack him in that fight. I mean, all credit to Zellhuber. He came back, managed to get the win. But I think there's more questions over his durability than there is over Ribovic.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's funny, these first two, the first two fights on the cards, like only Odie Osborne's like the big name for a lot of people. But unironically, I think this main card's fantastic, by the way. But I think these two fights legitimately have very high chance of being fight of the night.
Well, certainly hope so. I think that what I think the UFC like to do with a lot of these lower profile fights is I think they're kind of hoping to say, hey, like, we're giving you this big opportunity, this big card, make a name for yourself. Because, I mean, in terms of star power, there are bigger stars on the prelims than these two. So they've got confidence, in my opinion, that these fights are going to deliver.
Which one do you think Dana White's going to try and take credit for by making it his "if you don't know, now you know" fight?
Zellhuber. I get the feeling the Osborne fight is more of a showcase for Rodriguez. I think that's why that's there. We are moving on to the featherweight division now, and Joe, I'm getting a little bit of deja vu here because this was a fight we were supposed to be seeing 3 months ago. It is Brian Ortega who is taking on Diego Lopez. As mentioned before, originally planned for July, Ortega withdrew from the day of the fight. Dan Ige stepped in on very, very short notice. Probably earned himself a few 50, 60k in the process as well. So Lopez comes into this fight as a slight favourite over Brian Ortega, which in my opinion caught me a little bit by surprise. Are you surprised that the UFC chose to rebook this fight? Or should they have gone with different directions? Especially when you hear these rumours that Brian Ortega may be pursuing his career at lightweight after this match.
Yeah, I admittingly think that this fight still isn't happening. So I actually have 2 sets of notes. One's for the rematch with Dan Ige, and the other's for this one. No, I'm really surprised because I thought, for me, I thought they would probably lose faith in Brian Ortega and be like, fine, let's just move Diego Lopez up, because it seems like Brian Ortega fights very few and far between. Which kind of makes me wonder, like, what would happen if by some miracle he beat Max? Like, would he have been a very inactive champion?
I've actually got the stats here. Since the Max Holloway fight, Brian Ortega has fought 4 times in 6 years.
Yeah. It's crazy because he took all that time off, came back against Korean Zombie, and then he fought Volkanovski, got smashed on, needed time off, fought Yair, was it twice in a row?
Twice in a row, yes. Yeah. So there have been injuries. There was the season of Tough there as well. So some of it can be blamed on him, but some of it can be blamed on other circumstances.
Yeah. It's life. Cheating on Tracy Cortez. Yeah. I'm not one to comment on personal lives. Who knows?
That's more of an MMA guru thing.
That's more of me just being a clown. Ortega messed up, I think. I don't know. But anyways, I don't know. I'm surprised that do you remember the odds? Were the odds more or less in favor of Lopez now?
I believe they were. I believe they are more in favor of Lopez this time.
Okay, because I was genuinely wondering. I was a little afraid of this. Would the hype have died off on Lopez because he lost a round to a 2-hour notice Dan Ige?
It's something to think about. It is definitely something to think about. And I actually did have that question in mind for you over what you thought of Lopez maybe gassing at the end of the 3rd round against Dan Ige. But someone pointed out to me, Dan Ige was supposed to fight the week after. I think he was going to be fighting in the Apex. And his fight actually got booked. He was in a training camp longer than Lopez was for the Brian Ortega match, because that got put together, on 3 weeks' notice? And Ige had already known for a while that he was going to be fighting like for 5 or 6 weeks. So he was arguably a little bit more prepared than Lopez was.
Yeah, I think out of context, people are going to be like, ooh, I could see people out of context taking and being like, I think I'm going to cool down on Lopez. But in context, I think it's okay. Like I can look past it, admittingly, because he gassed out in over 2 rounds that you could argue are 10-8s. I don't think they are, but I think you could almost argue they're 10-8s.
If it's Mike Bell, it's a 10-8.
If it's Mike Bell, it's a 10. If it's Joe Neal, it's a 10-7. To reference a famous scorecard I have. But that's for the next fight. I'll talk about that scorecard. What's it called? This fight's interesting and it's almost kind of an anomaly. Like I think the first time they put this together, this was one of those ones where MMA fans were like, "Wow, this is good matchmaking." And now that it's retrying again, I feel like we're like, "Wow, this is bad matchmaking." All right.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of us want to see Danny Gay hit the proper top five.
It's only bad
Or
matchmaking.
not Danny Gay,
It's
Lopez,
only
of
bad
course.
matchmaking in my eyes because of Ortega saying he wants to go to lightweight. Because it kind of
Yeah,
makes this fight a little bit redundant.
yeah. It's like why? Why are you fighting him then?
Yeah.
Because if he wins, he kills off a prospect, like a mega guy, potential. And if he loses, it's kind of like, okay, that's a weird feather to put in your cap now.
And if Lopez wins, then he's fought a guy
Yeah,
that's not in the weight class anymore. So it's like,
yeah.
yeah,
It's like your favorite fighter currently going like, well, where's my title shot? I just fought a guy who wasn't a middleweight at middleweight and beat him.
you have to remind me who my favorite fighter is.
Well, he's about to get knocked out by Rob, so
Oh yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
Rumor is he's already pulled out.
I've heard that
No, I'm
rumor.
not
I've heard
joking.
that
I
rumor.
I heard it Monday and I laughed. Then I heard it again on Wednesday, and then I heard it last night from another person, all from like a different source, and I went, I knew it. Oh, it's ridiculous, man. Anyways, because we'll talk about that dork forever.
Yeah.
So,
Well, he doesn't shut up, so we have no choice to.
I know. I want to give him English lessons.
No need for that though when it comes to Brian Ortega. 16-3 record. Now, this is actually going to be the first time since 2018 that Brian Ortega has fought twice in a calendar year, because he was on that Mexico card where he managed to beat Yair Rodriguez, and in some ways kind of the quintessential Brian Ortega performance, which is survive a lot of
Yeah.
early adversity, have himself in a bit of trouble, but then manage to pull out the submission late on in the fight.
He also ended it in one of my favorite memes of the year for MMA, where people like because he held on to the choke for too long, right? A little too long, you know. He was kind of in the moment because it's a comeback. You get adrenaline running. It's like in that weird gray area for me where it's not quite Paul Harness level, so it can kind of, but it's not quite unforgivable. I think it's a judgment call. I forgive him personally for it. I've been in situations like that, so I can sympathize from my grappling days. But he had a reaction of like, "Oh, I wasn't doing nothing," kind of afterwards, and everyone was like saying like, "This is what happens when your mom walks in on you choking your brother." And as someone who used to choke his brother all the time growing up, yes, yes, it is. That is accurate.
I had an older sister, so I was probably the one on the wrong side of it.
My brother's 7 years younger than me, and we would go both work out, and he would have easier lessons, because he was just learning, thinking fighting's cool, and I'm, considering like maybe there's amateur in the future for me, and then we'll go from there. And me and my brother talk a lot of crap to each other, so I'd be like, okay, well, let's see what you got, and it always ended up with me just double egging him. Taking his back, slapping the back of his head, and choking him out. And then our mom walking in like, "What are you doing, Joseph?" And I'm like, "He was asking for it." Sorry, Anthony. Joe.
One of my hotter takes when it comes to Brian Ortega, I just want your opinion on this one, because if you ask a lot of people about Brian Ortega, they kind of paint him as this kind of Paul Craig figure, where he just has no clue what to do in the striking, but get him on the ground and he's a savant about it. I actually think Brian Ortega's striking is a lot better than people give it credit for.
I think it depends on how you look at it, right? I'm with you on this. It's infinitely better than the Paul Craig comparison. The problem with him on the feet is he's kind of a glass cannon. His defense is a little porous, I feel. I mean, this is a guy who took absurd punishment from Max Holloway and Volkanovski, which credit's due. Those are two of the best. They're in the top 3 featherweights ever. So, in their prime of their career. So when those fights happened, I think he's just a little hittable. Yair was having good success striking with him in their second fight. That's where the whole comeback started coming from. But no, like he legitimately outstruck Korean Zombie. he knocked first guy to knock out Frankie Edgar, you know, and so his striking, he's just kind of a glass cannon. And there's nothing wrong with that, because like a guy like Paul Craig, who we both love, and I mean this with all the respect, he's kind of a glass water gun, on the feet. Like there's a big difference between that, one or the other. So I think that's a little unfair against Brian Ortega. I mean, I think when you look at his game, he's just kind of a punching bag sometimes.
The one thing I will say that Brian Ortega does have though is, it's the one thing that I've kind of noticed with him especially, he's a very good at timing his counters. I struggle to think of another fighter that's able to time his strikes in the way he does with fighters coming in. Because that's how we finished Frankie. Like, Frankie was having more success early on in stand-up, and then he catches him with that elbow coming in. Frankie's on wobbly legs, doesn't dare want to shoot because he knows Ortega's a beast on the ground, has to keep it standing, and then the uppercut comes in.
Mm-hmm. Here's what's wild, too, about that. Because I agree with you there, too. Excuse me. Brian Ortega is not the fastest guy on the planet. He's kind of slow, like at his strike speed. A little slower. His spinning elbow was pretty quick against Korean Zombie, but I always kind of at least in my memory, it always feels like he's kind of punching in underwater a little bit, but his timing is there. Just because his speed isn't there doesn't mean his timing isn't. Not everyone's a marvelous Marvin Hagler who just had it everything. Because he timed the spinning elbow against Korean Zombie was off of a counter. He feinted, Korean Zombie decided to press in, he bit down on the feint and took a counter spinning elbow. So that's another example to prove your point.
And the other big thing as well that I think that Brian Ortega has, that's his X factor when it comes to his striking. On the ground, obviously great with submissions. I think the big thing that stands out for me in terms of how he's able to have so much success, he has this real awareness of where an opponent's head is.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that stands out for me, because with the Cub Swanson fight especially, because I think that was his first main event.
I think so.
He nearly caught Swanson at the end of the first round with the choke, and then managed to get it done again in the second. And even with the Volkanovski one, just almost instinctively, there's the neck, I'm going for it. And he nearly won that fight.
Yeah, that's the only round. I think he lost that round still, but that's the one moment that makes that fight go from, ooh, this is a great performance by Volkanovski to this is an all-time fight at featherweight, And he's kind of, I've seen people complain about this in the past, that he's a headhunter. He's too headhunty. But like you said, it's okay to be a headhunter, I suppose, if you're really good at always finding it. His name is T-City, because of Triangle City, but I always think of him as the guillotine guy. He's definitely. I mean, to be fair, those moves kind of lead into one another if you're really good at chaining positions and submissions. Shout out to Donald Cerrone, who was the first guy I saw ever do that in one of my favorite fights in WEC history against Benson Henderson.
That actually won #1 when I did my countdown of WEC's best fights.
Yeah, I like that fight more than, I know everyone talks about Benson Henderson, Anthony Pettis, which is a fantastic fight. I like that Cerrone fight more personally too.
Yeah, Zombie Garcia's got to be up there as well.
Yeah, that fight's awesome. The judges try their hardest to ruin that fight, and it's really hard for them to not. I love WEC. WEC is just chef's kiss.
So, word of advice. If you're on the Patreon page, let us nominate some WEC. We need an excuse to cover more cards by them.
Yeah. Is there a short guy awareness month? And maybe you just Team Alpha Male, and you want to see me do my Team Alpha Male jokes and impressions.
Because we've only done one WEC card so far, and that was 48, which was basically a UFC card in drag.
They called it The Company.
Yeah, they didn't even call WEC on the show.
You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of I've been on a kick of these movies lately because the new one's fantastic in the last month. I got to see it twice. But the first Alien movie, where they don't call it Wayland Yutani because they didn't have a name for it at the time. They always talk about Ash. I always forget his name. Well, he was Bilbo Baggins in the original, in the Hogwarts trilogy, Lord of the Rings trilogy. He's like, it's a perfect life form. It must be brought back to the company. They always call it the company. So it reminds me of like that movie, watching that card again.
It's going to be interesting to see what kind of fight we get when you take into account Diego Lopez. In some ways, quite similar to Brian Ortega in being a submission guy who likes chaining together submissions, but has in recent fights, especially in the UFC, gotten a lot more confident with his hands.
This guy's an animal. Everyone kind of knows me on the channel for being a big nerd. I mean, we both are. We always say, but big, massive nerd. Got the Dark Souls right there. I'm wearing a Batman shirt. But in my D&D, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and this guy comes across as like a barbarian in that, because he's putting the pressure forward. He's throwing one straight punch maybe, and then he'll like kind of pivot and step in, and here comes 40 hooks and uppercuts. And then when you leave distance, he's throwing a head kick. Like once he enters that like action range, here comes the onslaught. Like it doesn't seem to stop. And then if he gets you on the ground, top contender of Loyev was like what was kind of met his match almost against him at 7 days notice. If it wasn't for the gas tank, I mean, I want that rematch personally more than the Aljo fight against Evloev. Because wow, like this guy just feels like I'm gonna finish you in the first 2 rounds no matter what. And that's where the question kind of comes in, though, that third round, which we saw happen against Ige, we saw happen against Evloev, which that one's 7 days notice, and the Ige one we've kind of talked about the context surrounding it as well, but it's still enough to make us go, on it, so to speak.
Why do you think it's taken so long then for Lopez to sort of make it to the big show? Because people are kind of painting him as this kind of like overnight sensation. And I mean, yeah, his debut against Evloev, that was just over a year ago, something like that. So he's only been in the UFC for a comparatively short amount of time. But this is also a guy that's had over 30 fights, 6 losses on his record. He lost on the Contender Series when he tried to get into the UFC through that means. Like, why do you think it has taken him so long to actually just break through?
It's super weird, isn't it? Like, I know he was our rookie of the year, or at least mine. I don't know about yours. I think he was, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but he was my rookie of the year last year because the Evloev fight was an incredible performance, and then he had Pat Sabatini, Gavin Tucker, but I'm looking at it now. He was entering into combat jiu-jitsu a lot. So I wonder if him kind of splitting time between competition grappling and MMA might have hurt him. But if you look at his streaks on the regional scene, they're huge. And they're 99% finished. It feels like. I'm looking over, I was like, what, how big was his streak? But he was doing, like, he wrestled or he grappled a couple matches here. It was after the Contender Series against in the Combat Jiu-Jitsu Worlds events. But it's really weird because I don't have a theory as to why it took him so long. I know he's a coach as well, so I wonder if splitting between coaching, competition grappling, and MMA meant it's going to make the journey for the MMA path a little longer. Because I feel like it's really hard to kind of half-ass, not literally, but, put in half your time into MMA. I think, we're going to talk about him on the INC Uncaged, I'd imagine a ton, but Demetrius Johnson, he had the great fight against Brad Pickett. And I think it was after that fight, Matt Hume said, "Hey, you lost. And I think it's time you quit your job."
I think it might have been Cruz. I think he was still part-time when he fought Cruz.
Yeah, and then that's where the big turning the corner came. You know, a lot of fighters, whenever they think that it's okay, I can turn that corner and become and like I can turn the corner and you know make this my career. That you tend to see an explosion of success come out of that. Because like guys like Damian Maya, Gabriel Gonzaga, Fabricio Verdum, all these other guys that um, were competition grapplers. They they had to drop grappling completely to focus on MMA. And then once they got to the big show and once they were kind of comfortable, they could kind of go back and forth, right? Um, but you got guys like Mikey Mushemi, Gordon Ryan, who dip their toes into MMA, but they're not like 100% in. And Gordon Ryan's so juiced up to the gills, openly, that John Jones is asking about his doctor, like, that dude, if those dudes touched, and like if those dudes like if you gave them like a thumb prick, like like you're trying to take a blood test, it's probably gonna like spurt out like xenomorph blood. Speaking of aliens again, they're just so juiced up. It's insane. Like, and Gordon Ryan's open about it. Like, I didn't know Gordon Ryan was younger than me. I don't know
It's
if you knew
scary.
that.
He's what, 29 years old? He looks about 50.
Yeah. It's like it's not just like, oh, he dyed his hair white and blonde or whatever. They're like, no, no, no. I've seen him baby like without his beard, like within the last like 5 years, like, and then it's just like a stubble. He looks like he's in his like late 30s, like at that time without his beard. Like, that dude is just on that dude's on rocket fuel. Like,
I was going to say the last
but
Gordon I saw with that much talk was pulling the Big Express.
that's a good one. Man, yeah, I wonder if it's that though, like, because you're kind of split three ways. I feel like that's really hard to do when you're trying to make it. I think it's easier to do when you're there.
Yeah. So which way are you leaning with this one here? Because I think stylistically these guys favour one another. Lopez, I think, comes in with a lot more hype, a lot more momentum. I can't help but feel, though, that people are sleeping on how good Brian Ortega is. The
Yeah.
question is, how good is he still? Maybe I'm still thinking about the 2018 Brian Ortega a little bit.
I really like how you worded that. That's a really interesting question. I'm gonna give two predictions here because I legitimately don't think Brian Ortega's showing up to fight. Nothing against him personally. It's just I know how life is. Trust me, I get it. And injuries and things come up. It's kind of hard, And I personally feel like he's a little unreliable currently. That said, and I know he already fought once this year. He's hit his quota. Joking. But I'm gonna pick Diego Lopez. I struggle to see Diego Lopez like KOing him with strikes, finishing him through strikes, because Volkanovski pounded on his head. Unless he fails I'm trying how to word this. Brian Ortega got hit so many times so hard, his head was pounded into the mat by Volkanovski, and then when Herb Dean asked him to, hey, can you, how many fingers am I holding up? He got them all wrong, and they let him fight still. So clearly that guy's impossible to finish. The ref can't even finish him. So it's not going to happen that way, and I struggle to see Diego Lopez finishing Brian Ortega on the mat as well. I think it's a decision. I think the third round could be potentially scary for Lopez, but that's how I feel. And then I'm probably going to say he finishes Danny Ige this time.
Do you think it's going to be Ige? Do you think it's going to be Ige again?
I mean, that sounds fun, doesn't it? That first fight's awesome.
It was a good fight. I mean, given the circumstances.
Yeah. It's really good.
Because I remember when he changed the card around when Ratliff missed weight at 279. None of those three fights were any good when they had to do the card shuffle.
Yeah. And then now it's like, then that card kind of got saved by Ortega and then Pereira. Ortega, Lopez, and Bejeda, Yuri too. That card kind of got saved a little bit, and it turned it around to like, oh, this is, I'm actually kind of digging this card. And admittingly, Diego Lopez Dan Ige was really good.
The one thing I will say though, and this will be my last point before we move on to the two title fights. There's a lot of people putting forward the idea, if Diego Lopez was to win, of having him fight the winner of Max versus Ilya. I hope not. Only because there's been a big sort of discussion around this year in regards to meritocracy in the UFC. Movsar Evloev holds a win over Diego Lopez. Yes, it was short notice. Yes, there were mitigating circumstances, but he does have that win. Let's start giving guys who have earned the title fights, giving them their rewards, and not just going for whoever's flashier or the bigger talker.
We have storylines regarding this same issue in the next two fights.
Arguably, yes.
I think. Yeah. In the co-main event, I disagree with that notion, of course, admittingly. Surprisingly, I feel like knowing my meme history. But in the main event especially, there's a lot of that, justifiably so, I think. So, and then we have the situation at 205.
Which is ridiculous.
A guy pops hot twice. You're still fighting for the title. What is he, John Jones? What is this? What is this nightmare? Maybe that's why. Maybe maybe Dana White looks at Khalil Roundtree and is like, you remind me of a young John Jones. And how he fights? No, in his needle use. Have you ever hung out underneath the ring, like peeing in bottles? So you hiding from USADA. I've done that a couple times. Get him a title shot. This is our new star.
Core main event time, and it is the fight that will probably end our friendship. Alexa Grasso is taking on Valentina Shevchenko here. Women's flyweight title is on the line. I believe it is the first trilogy fight in women's flyweight history. And you kind of touched on it at the end of the last segment there, Joe. Do you think the UFC have made the right call running this fight back?
I don't think there was a right or wrong call at the end of it, because admittingly, as much as I want to joke, I'm saving my one joke I'm allowed. As per the truce between me and Shevchenko fans, I'm allowed one good joke about it. Admittingly, I think you could move on after that second fight, but I think you could also run the trilogy. I think they were both pretty solid calls. And so I think we're wasting time a little bit. That's a little bit my opinion here. That said, after seeing a lot of opinions from a lot of Shevchenko fans, they seemed genuine. They seemed pretty plausible and pretty like, okay, I can dig it. That I think both ideas were about equal in terms of how good the matchmaking was.
I'm going to say the UFC have made the right call. I think that if Grasso had won that fight fair and square, I certainly wouldn't be calling for a rematch. I'd say let's move on. We're sort of like, I feel like the guard is changing at flyweight anyway, and that would be sort of like the big moment to say, okay, here's a new generation. But I think the controversy surrounding the rematch, whether it was Mike Bell's scorecard, whether Shevchenko won the fight outright, whether it was the knees in the fourth round, I think there's so many X's and O's regarding that second fight. A trilogy fight was needed, just to put a line in the sand. Mm-hmm. Where I do have a problem, though, is waiting a year to do it. If we'd done this fight around sort of March, April time, no problem. As things stand right now, I just don't think it's fair on Manon Fiorot, Rose Namajunas, Natalia Silva, all that sort of band to be waiting another 5 or 6 months for their opportunity.
Do you think this is a byproduct of Tough being outdated?
I think the Tough was more used to buy time. Because the UFC could then say, I think the moment they got the Sphere and they ran with this idea of incorporating Noche UFC into the Sphere, they wanted Grasso on that card. But, of course, you can't really say we're going to have Grasso on hold for a year until that time. So TUF was a way of trying to just buy some time.
Okay. And so instead of it being a tough problem, tough being the problem, it's just marketing, essentially. Yeah, okay. I like that idea more.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was a tough issue, personally. But the way you described that, I'm on your side.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be.
I'm on your side, except for like.
And what's that?
I thought Alexa Grasso did win fair and square,
Which is fair enough. I certainly don't think there's any kind of right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
I personally thought.
Yeah, I think I scored. What round is the 10-8 from Mike?
The final round.
Yeah, see, that's interesting, because I think he was being a little too easy on her.
I personally get.
I think 10-7, right? You with me on that?
Honestly, that final round is closer to being a 10-9 Chev than it is a 10-8 Grasso.
You think so?
Legitimately, yes. I think that for 3.5 minutes of that final round, Chev's in control.
But I don't think she's doing much. I don't know. That's a close fight, and I think that's a mark of a interesting.
And that's what what a lot of people forget as well. Is it was a good fight.
Both fights are awesome. The first one's obviously better,
I wonder
that
why.
Doesn't count, guys. That doesn't count, Chev fans. That doesn't count. That's my opinion. The first fight's better, but yeah, I think this trilogy's been awesome, right? Like, I mean, the first two, right? It's been great. Fights are great. Second one was fight of the night, I think, right?
Yes.
Was it over JDM and Kevin Holland?
I think so. I didn't enjoy that fight.
Me neither. But everyone talks about that fight for some reason. I'm like, why? That fight sucked. It's like one of the few bad JDM fights. He's got like two.
I've kind of enjoyed the story surrounding the trilogy as well. And I think that's because, me, I'm very Eric Bischoff in terms of enjoying the story. And I kind of like the idea that here we have this like long-reigning dominant champion in Chev, who's starting to slow down a little bit. We saw signs of that against Tyler Santos. Some of the tricks that she used maybe aren't as effective as they once were. She then gets shocked. A lot of people think, hey, was that maybe a fluke? They run the rematch back. And the old veteran still shows that, hey, she is still good enough to hang with the young breed. But it's still not the same fighter. And I kind of like the idea of like the old dog still trying to desperately cling on to that torch, as it were, and the young kid like trying to pull it away from her.
I like your story more than what I've interpreted.
It's kind of like, I don't know if you follow Formula One, but I remember this. It was the 2006 season. So Ferrari had an off season in 2005. Fernando Alonso won the title, but a lot of people thought, hey, you only beat Schumacher because Schumacher had a bad car that year. The next year, the Ferrari's a lot more competitive. We have that season-long battle between the two, and Alonso beats Schumacher fair and square. And that's like, okay, the torch is passed. That's kind of the same vibe I'm getting from this.
I'm getting... are you a Shakespeare fan? That sounds...
I read some Shakespeare when I was at school.
Asking the Englishman if he's Shakespeare.
I was more Dickens, to be honest. I prefer Dickens.
He's great, too. Big fan of BFG.
That's Roald Dahl.
That's Roald Dahl. But Charles, I don't know, why did I get that mixed up? Excuse me. But, I think of it like kind of like Macbeth, in a sense, where, Macbeth gets fraud checked because he did a spin...
Is that your joke? Is that your one Chev joke?
That was it. I gotta be honest, guys. I've been saving that up since the card started, and I am just happy I kept a straight face during it.
I will say, I actually saw Sean Brady's post earlier this week where he called out fans for like how quickly they jump to the term fraud check.
Okay, Shevchenko herself wasn't fraud checked. She just got exploited because that is the technique and game plan of spinning when you're back or when you're being pressured backwards got fraud checked. Not Shev herself, the stupid, because she's done that so many times in fights and no one's just capitalized on it, even though it's pretty easy to. And Alexa Grasso and her team was training it. Like Shevchenko wasn't fraud checked. That habit was punished in fighting game terms. I think fraud checked is just funny. That was my one joke, guys. I apologize. I mean, it's all love between us, but
I think
I'm just happy I kept a straight face. That's the hardest I think I've made you laugh ever on the show.
I think a lot of this. No, the other one was Slacky saying that someone punches like a little girl.
Not Merab.
Zabit.
What's his face? Zabit. Yes, Magomed Sharapov. Yeah. Punches like a small girl. But that's one of my all-time favorite previous show moments too.
We'll talk about Alexa Grasso here. So we've got a 16-3-1 record. Her last fight was that draw with Shev back in Noche UFC. Notable wins outside of that include Araujo, Jojo Calderwood, Macy Barber, which is a win which is aging very well. Also has wins over Carolina and Randa Marcos back when she was at strawweight. I've had to watch a lot of Grasso fights, obviously, because we did the video on her, which is up on the channel. So watch it now before it inevitably gets demonetized. One of the things that stood out for me when comparing Grasso at strawweight to how she fights now, I counted Grasso only went for one takedown in her entire strawweight career, and that was her debut when she fought Heather Clark. She is a lot more confident in her grappling abilities now than she was back at 115.
I got to take credit for that because I come from a grappling base, and of course, I'm using the wedding ring we have here. No, I'm kidding. I think a lot of it's. I know she changed camps, I believe.
The big thing was seeing a sports psychologist. I think that was the big thing. That was the big turnaround. So between the Suarez fight and the Carolina fight, she started seeing a sports psychologist, sort of like focusing mentally for matches. And you did see a big uptick in her performance afterwards. So like she dominated Carolina. And even though she lost against Carla, like she was piecing Carla apart in that final round. She got the most entertaining fight of Carla Esparza's career.
Yeah, she made Carla work. And was putting it on her, too, admittingly. I think this, too. I know you and me are Carla fans. Or not Carla fans, really. But
I'm somebody who wants Carla to get...
sympathizers?
Yeah, I'm somebody who wants Carla to get more respect than what she does.
Yeah, that's not... I really think... Yes, she's in the worst fight of all time. So is Rose. Rose doesn't get trashed for being in the worst fight ever. It takes two to tango. And Rose's game plan was specifically to let's make the entire audience fall asleep. No, I'm not making the Pat Barry joke here. No, I'm not. I am not. We're already in hot water with you too. You do not need me to make a joke. So yeah, I think a sports psychologist makes perfect sense. Because I myself, little pullback of the curtain, I had a lot of issues and stuff like that going on with my life, and I had a big turnaround. I had already kind of gotten rid of my I had already beaten alcoholism at this time, but I was still struggling with life, and I went to go see therapy, and it fucking it changed my life, admittingly, but as well. When I went to school to be a psychologist, and I wanted to be a sports psychologist because there was guys like Cowboy Cerrone who had all the tools that are like, all right, time to fight a guy for a #1 contender bout or a championship, and it's like here he's gonna mentally break before the fight happens, and I always use that. So big ups to her. I love seeing sports psychology take center stage and be a big contributing factor in things. Another thing of note here, both of them are basically even on the feet, or even in terms of statistics. Like, they're both 5'5". Grasso has a .5 reach advantage, so half an inch on the feet, only 2 centimeters more. But what's really weird, I thought, is one of them has a stat the other one doesn't. Shevchenko doesn't have this stat, but they have Grasso's shoe size.
I bet you know that figure all too well.
Not a feet guy, thankfully.
There's one guy who is.
It's.
I put that in the video.
That's still one of the funniest moments of all time.
Because I know she's leaned into it in recent years, but that legitimately did feel like, what the hell?
Why do you want to see my feet? Like, felt bad. I felt bad for her. I should have been there to like help her. Be like, no, don't. You don't feed him anymore. And our YouTube comments loved her.
Have you noticed anything different about the way the Grasso fights between strawweight and flyweight?
She's much more confident switching stances. Much more confident switching stances. She was already kind of a switch hitter a little bit at strawweight, but I also feel like she didn't have a lot of power to her punch at strawweight. I feel like there's a little bit more here at flyweight. She's still not one-shotting people, but a little more pop to enough to make your opponent go, ooh, okay, that got me. I got to think about that. And that's what she kind of excels on. I think her footwork, no pun intended, is legitimately better. I think her grappling has come a long ways, I think, as well. I think her grappling has legitimately gotten a lot better.
Scrambling. That's the big thing for me, is the scrambling. Because
in the first fight, Valentina takes her down looking to Jake Shields or John Fitcher or what have you. And whichever you prefer. They're both equal blankets. And the scrambles are very good. She struggled to stop the takedown, but she could get back up.
That's a big thing for me, because I think that you might have some questions about how Shev gets the takedowns. I know that's something that Jack Slack does bring up a lot when it comes to Valentina, and justify criticism. But I do think when Shev does get people down, one of the big things that I found everyone brings up Shev's striking as her sort of forte, and I completely understand why. Her grappling ability, especially during her flyweight reign, is incredible. But she hasn't had anybody who's able to scramble and get back to their feet. She was taking girls down, she was taking Andrade down and hammering her from crucifix. And that's the one thing that has stood up with me. And you can maybe see a sense of frustration from Shev of God, this woman just won't stop moving.
Yeah. You legitimately can see the frustration in her face in between the fights of all around, or in between both fights and between the rounds when situations like that happen. If you kind of think about it, the two people to give her the hardest fights, and in my personal opinion, one of them I still firmly believe beat, and this is my bias as well because I've scored it for different fighters in similar fights, so it could be my bias 102%, but I think Talia Santos beat Shevchenko.
It's a very close fight. A very close fight.
And the reason I'm willing to admit my bias here, right, is I scored round 4 for Volkanovski against Islam in their first fight. And I also didn't score it for Pantoja in the Moreno 3 fight when similar situations were happening. And which I think is, I'm openly admitting, looking back now with hindsight, a little hypocritical of me. So, because I scored it for Santos, but not, in the other fights. But I think Shevchenko was the one getting thrown down and laid and preyed on and controlled by Santos, and that gave her trouble. And Alexa Grasso was scrambling and moving and going, and I think, what I thought was interesting was Grasso seems like the better striker or at least getting the better of her consistently on the field.
A faster striker.
Yeah.
And I think that's just maybe down to Father Time.
Maybe. I think a lot of it's also is, we've talked about this for years. When we were hyping up Talia Santos, we brought this point up. There's a lot of tape on Shevchenko. A lot of tape.
And that's what Grasso
a lot of it feels like
got
time.
the first fight with. Just seeing the tape.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Fraud check? No, I'm not saying it again. There's a lot of quirks in women's MMA that guys MMA doesn't have, and I'm not demeaning one or the other. I'm not that guy. I love women's MMA extensively, and no, not just because what they look like. I know the joke coming, but there's things like the head and arm choke, or not the head and arm choke, the head and arm throw on the feet, which just doesn't work really. And when you see guys go for it, and certain techniques and tactics that just don't work. And I'm always a big fan when someone, does the not the impossible, but sees that technique and goes, why is this working when it doesn't work for the dudes, and then counters it. And I don't think we see that. I don't think we see the spinning when you're backing up and retreating anymore. Straight back, that is. Like Valentina used to do. Valentina didn't do that really at all in their second fight. It was props to her. You always want to see the adjustments from fighters. And I don't see women's MMA people doing that anymore. So now I need someone to counter head and arm throw, and we'll be perfect.
I think for me, the big thing that's going to stand out for me, and again, I'm going to bring up age is a big factor in this as well. One of the things I have noticed is I've kept track of the INC polls each time these two have fought. So in the first fight, it was no question. 91% of people picked Shev to beat Grasso. For the rematch...
We even did.
Yeah. But I did say that I thought it was going to be Shev's last title defense, and that the person...
Yeah, we thought we both picked Manon.
I thought Manon Finau was going to be the one to beat her.
Yeah. Me too.
When we went to the rematch in Noche UFC, it went down to Shev 53%. This time around, Grasso 58%. So more people are picking Alexa Grasso to win this one.
Yeah. I think this is a pick'em on the odds, if I'm correct.
I believe so, yes.
Oh, it's a slight, is it? Because Tapology has the odds. I usually I won't look at the odds until after you do the intro, because I like the live reaction to the odds whenever you do it, because there was one that blew my mind how insane it was. But this is minus 115 for Alexa, and it's minus 105 for Valentina.
So yeah, Grasso just a slight favour for that one.
Practically pick 'em.
So,
and
I'm going to be picking Grasso to win this one. I just think that Father Time beats everyone, and I don't think Shev is at that stage of her career anymore where she's able to adapt and learn new surroundings. It's very much sort of... Well, she did make changes for the rematch, but I don't think she's going to fundamentally overhaul her career. I just don't think she can afford to at 36.
No, it's hard.
I think regardless of the result, though, we're going to get ourselves a good story. We're going to get ourselves something to carry forward. Either Grasso finishes the trilogy, and we finally get that line in the sand. The new generation of flyweights are here. So, the Shev era is over. Let's move on. Of course, if Shev wins, then 36-year-old getting the belt back. Very hard thing to do, especially in women's MMA at that age. Kudos to her.
Yeah, big props.
Here's a question I do have, though. Our final question before we move on to our main event. I'm going to make a little bit of a bold prediction. As mentioned before, I am picking Grasso to win this one. I'm going to say...
My man.
I'm going to say third round submission. I think she's going to get it done again.
It's similar to me. I have a first round knockout off the first punch. No, I genuinely have it 5 round. I think she wins 4-1.
I can see that one, actually. Actually, to be honest, I'm favouring your choice a bit more.
I like your choice more because I want to pick. My heart picks yours. My brain picks this.
I'm going to make a bold prediction. I don't think Shev is going to call it a day.
No.
But I think her next fight is a 135. Because
Same
if you
here.
look at the new generation of fights, as long as Grasso's champion, Shev isn't getting a second chance at the belt.
No chance.
And do you really want to go through people like Natalia Silva, Erin Blanchfield, a rejuvenated Rose Namajunas? Do you want to go through those lot? Or do you want to go through...
Now you got to fight Manon Farrow. No.
Or do you want to go through Myra Silva, Macy Chasson, the loser of Raquel versus Julie. It's an easier road to the title, arguably. Yes, those girls are going to be bigger than you, but a 36-year-old Chev, in my opinion, has more chance of beating those girls than she does the new breed of flyweights.
I would probably go so far as to say 36-year-old Chev, 37 if we're being realistic and timetable-wise, 37-year-old Shevchenko has a better chance at beating Kayla Harrison than anyone else in that 135-pound division.
The speed.
Kayla Harrison is still winning, but I think Shevchenko gives it a better chance. I see that fight going similar to, one of my favorite post-fight moments ever. Kayla Harrison wins a dominant decision, and you hear, "But her nose is rose from my punches." I think of something like that. Right? Reminds you of another dominant loss she took. That fight is super close.
It's very close. Like, I don't think anyone...
I've watched it a lot.
I don't think anyone will ever cover it as a retro review.
No.
But if they did, one of the ideas I have is, you know that scene from American Beauty with Mina Savari?
Yeah.
Like, Nunes in that position and maybe like disgusted Chev.
That sounds funny. I mean, I could always do it for a one of those rainy day videos where I talk about just that fight. Like, hey, no one's picking this. Let's be real. Can I just talk about this fight, like how close it is?
I will say
because I've scored it the same way every time, but my opinion of how close it is gets like more microscopic every time.
So now it's time to talk about our main event of the evening, and the bantamweight title is on the line. Sean O'Malley is defending his belt up against Merab Dvalishvili. So the bookmakers' odds for this one, now Merab started as quite a substantial favourite, but that line has closed between the two. So at the moment, I believe Merab is down to about 135, minus 135, something like that. So I want to bring this up with you, Joe, as somebody with Mexican heritage. Where do you personally stand on Noche UFC, celebration of Mexican culture, taking place between an American and a Georgian in the main event?
Well, we've actually me and the Mexican delegation have adopted Merab into our ranks. He's actually made that joke a ton, right? That he himself is he goes, no, I'm Mexican now. I fight more like a Mexican. I'm like, yeah, that's actually fair. He fights a very, grindy, pushing the pace forward, body attacks, kind of getting it done. Blue collar, so to speak, which is a Mexican staple, you could say. So I think I know he said that, and I feel like that's like the joke is that's our Mexican. The main event is Merab, which I'm okay with, and I actually like that joke a lot. So I'm okay with it personally. I could understand someone like my mom not being very happy about it.
I don't think you could have ran the Sphere with Grasso in the main event.
No,
but
because she's next to Box Office Poison. I gotta stop myself. These jokes are too easy.
In all fairness, they've never tried Cher as a pay-per-view A-side.
No, and they also, whenever they made her the main, the co-main, very rarely was the whole card stacked, right? They do that to, sadly, I believe they do that to women's MMA a lot. Because
that's one of the things, in my opinion, that made Noche UFC so special, in my opinion, was that it was a TV card which had the bells and whistles of a pay-per-view. And in my opinion, it made Grasso versus Chev 2 feel like a bigger fight than it would have been to say co-main to Izzy versus Strickland.
I agree. It was I thought Noche UFC was one of the better cards of last year in terms of pomp and circumstance of it.
And honestly, pulling back the curtain a little bit, probably the most enjoyable preview show that we did.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, maybe it was because it was last minute, maybe it was because it was a slightly different format, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, the fans also voted for us to do it.
They did,
yes. That kind of pumped us up. Yeah, we got pumped up, and excited. People care. Yeah. Because I remember you talking about it. You're like, I feel weird not having a preview show for a title fight, even if it's a fight night, essentially. And we both were like, yeah, let's ask the fans. And there we go.
And thank you very
It was a lot
much
of
for
fun.
doing it. Because I'll be honest, my mum and dad, my sister, my family, they don't watch the show.
No, no. I told my mom not to because I talk bad. I told her, I said, I talk bad about you, and I talk about, becoming an atheist just to ward her off. I don't want her doing that. No, I'm joking. On both accounts. But yeah, my brother does sometimes, but he says it's weird because it's like he goes, I'm watching, like, a lot of my close friends have talked about how it's kind of weird. They'll be like, it's like, dude, I know you. My best friend, he makes me laugh because he goes, it's really hard watching the preview show or the retro review because you're just going to talk to me about it anyways before the video comes up. And it's like, yeah, me and him half the time will have our own retro review after, like, I get done, like, writing it down or during filming. I'll be like, yeah, I always forget how good that fight is. And he goes, oh, that card's actually pretty good. Or that card sucks, doesn't it? Like, yeah, it does. And next thing we know, we're ranting about that. So I know the vibe, dude. I always appreciate the fan responses to us.
I can't help get the feeling, though, that obviously the Sphere is this quite highly hyped event by the UFC. They're making a big song and dance about it. We've talked ad nauseum about the ticket prices. I can't help but feel, that part of the reason that the UFC have chosen Sean O'Malley as the main event is this is just another attempt to try and sort of Roman Reigns him a little bit. Because the UFC desperately wants Sean O'Malley to be a star.
And he just isn't. Like, it's super funny.
If he's a star, then I don't think it's with the right fan base, if I can call it that. I can imagine that sort of Instagram, TikTok generation being into Sean O'Malley with the colourful hair, with the striking style. But are those people going to be paying money to go to events to watch him on pay-per-view? I'm not too sure.
No, they have to ask their parents for money. They have to ask their parents permission to get the card. You can't buy those cards if you're under 18.
And I think that's it's kind of the catch-22 that the UFC have. Like, again, I'm not part of the Instagram, TikTok generation, so I might be completely out the loop.
Neither. I'm 30. I'm out of it. I'm too. My brother's like in that weird space where he's like under it too, like a little bit, or he's actually above it too. So, and he's 23.
I mean, that being said,
it's just not.
That being said, though, we did try doing reels. Like, briefly, we tried for 1 week. We tried doing reels of like all of our preview shows, and the one we did about MVP versus Gary actually did do quite well.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Well, mostly because Ian Gary is sadly a meme.
True.
Yeah, true. I mean, I feel at the risk of sounding like old man yelling at cloud, and I do feel like his style and everything like that. As a fan of rap, he loves like the mumble rap. Let's die in their early 20s from drugs, kind of like friends, I don't know. I don't think he's a good look as a champion, personally. I'm not saying anything against the guy personally. I don't know him, but that's just kind of like from his crowd and his fan base, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's really funny. It kind of reminds me, like one of the critiques of like the Marvel movies now has been that it's old people writing humor for millennials to try and be like, don't you get it? Isn't it funny? People that are definitely like in their 60s and 70s writing to try and sound like they're in their late 20s to mid 30s. And that's kind of the vibe I kind of get from Sean O'Malley, where like the UFC sees him and it's like, oh, this guy's got colorful hair and a face tattoo. Yeah, this guy must be what the kids want. Push him. Don't give him a wrestler. He's wrestles. Jeez, I make it hard on him.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because we have had this sort of big question mark. We brought this up again several times during this show. We've talked about people like Ankalaev, Evloev, people like that, where even like a couple of weeks ago when they got rid of Makayev because of his wrestling style, like the UFC, in my opinion, are taking a bit of a dangerous approach when it comes to the treatment of wrestlers?
They're a little too harsh, and I love you saying that specifically because you're very open that you're not a fan of the smash style.
I don't like the Dagestani style, but if that's the best style to get someone to the top, you can't hold that against them.
Mm-hmm. I've said it 1,000 times. GSP, he's my current pick at number 2. The time has passed. I can definitely say I have someone else at 1. GSP is my number 2 though. And for a long time he's a lot of people's number 1 ever. For a long time he was my number 1. Easily the greatest, one of the greatest, if not the greatest ever. Boring. Nothing wrong with it. Meritocracy. Yeah, dude, top 2 ever. Historically boring. There's some great fights in his catalog, but historically boring. And I think it's very unfair that here comes like Merab getting treated badly. Makhayev's just a douche, but he was, I don't think it was necessarily. I think it was a combination.
You could make an argument that Makhayev could have been fighting Pantoja next, legitimately.
Yeah, I think he probably would have been, even if. But he ran his mouth too much. He was too much of a problem backstage. And then he had a PR nightmare of sucker punching his opponent before the fight. Doing
that with the fight being a stinker as well.
Yeah, I think if he was like a really nice guy, or at least kind of funny, then he probably could have gotten away with that, right? Like, I think Merab's entertaining because he's just like high volume, high action. I've only seen one bad Merab fight I can think of. Fight is terrible. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was so bad it was a win that moved him down. Think about that.
And we bring this up because Merab, in my opinion, is a guy who has been long overdue a chance of fighting for the belt. But because he has that cardio wrestling style, the guy's had to win 10 fights in a row. And you think about the amount of guys who get fast-tracked because they're strikers. And this guy's had to... I would like to just see a little bit more fairness when it comes to the UFC.
And he's had some great fights in this run. After the Aldo fight, because here's how I look at it. Aldo would have gotten a title shot for beating Merab, I think. I think if we're going to do that, then you probably could have gone ahead with a title shot for Merab after Aldo. But in fairness, that win lowered his stock. Weirdly enough, right? It's like one of those weird situations where you kind of like you succeed downward. Then he had a great fight with Petr Yan, I thought, where he broke Petr.
Dominant.
Yeah. These are two guys who have fought Petr Yan in this main event. One of them destroyed Petr Yan. The other one got bailed out, in my opinion. And MMA math doesn't work. I'm not saying it does, but it's just kind of interesting. Henry Cejudo fight was super interesting for me. And he is running around like Matt Hughes had, like carrying him like Matt Hughes carried Frank Trigg on his shoulder, asking where should I dump him. And that's an Olympic gold medalist, arguably a top 10 fighter ever, that's still very good doing this. Like, the Marlon Moraes fight's great. And because it's a great comeback, it shows that he has the durability and stamina to survive kind of a crazy onslaught. He's fought that tough, weird guy like a Casey Kenny as well. Brad Katona on here. The Ricky Simone fight is hilariously weird. Because I agree with the call. Personally.
Are we allowed to talk about Casey Kenny?
Is something bad happening?
Oh, Google it.
Oh no.
Not pleasant.
Oh, not pleasant. Oh no. I didn't know. I legitimately I just know he hasn't been fighting recently. I apologize if there's any kind of thing. I legitimately
got cut from the UFC because of it.
Yeah, okay. Because the last thing I remember was he said something stupid. I'm guessing it's not that because he still fought after saying something stupid.
It's connected to what he said, which was stupid, if you think about it.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Yeah, get him out of here. Yeah, I genuinely had no idea. Yeah. Yeah. No, apologies for bringing him up then. If anyone was in fairness, he was a loser in this scenario. Uh, yeah, he's worked his ass off, and he's also not just doing MMA like we talked about that. Like he took the harder road because he was doing sambo at one point, and he also had a grappling match in 2021 after the Marlon Moraes fight. Like, and here comes, him having to work his way up when Sean O'Malley got a title shot off of, was it losing the first round and eye poking your way to get bailed out? Oh, it was, that was and beating Piotr Jan in Abu Dhabi with like stinky judging, right? Like, and no disrespect to his last two wins. Obviously, the Aljo win is great. The Chito Vera one, Chito shouldn't have been there. Yeah. It's stupid the fight took place. We were all saying it should have been Merab.
Someone made a great point. They compared O'Malley versus Chito 2 to Hogan Warrior.
Yeah, that's essentially what it was. They even had the test of strength and fireball spot. I remember the test of strength spot leading into the blowjob moment from WrestleMania.
Did Chito have his light panning across the crowd like a bat symbol?
Well, I remember in the press conference, they had O'Malley talking, then the lights went out, and it's Chito in the background, like getting ready for the fight.
Who's the disciple in this case?
It's got to be not Eric.
Tim Welsh.
What's that? Tim Welsh. Man, Tim Welsh is the key to all of this. He's the Horace Hogan. Tim Welsh is the key to all this.
There's a lot of people framing this fight as essentially striker versus grappler. Is there more to it than that?
O'Malley has competitive grappling experience. He's not very good at it, I think, as an outsider looking in. As the couch potato, your MMA guru of sorts, he's not very good at it, me being fat and old and out of shape. I don't know. He hasn't really impressed me with his grappling. I'm impressed with the fact that he went and did it, so it's clear he works on it. I haven't seen, at least, maybe I haven't seen enough. Maybe someone can, call me out and be like, oh, what are you talking about? You look great in this. So maybe I just haven't seen enough because, but Merab, in the striking, he outstruck Piotr Jan, which is interesting. And he did it with volume and just not giving him any openings. He outstruck a little bit Henry Cejudo, but he got caught. Henry Cejudo clobbered him at one point. Merab is definitely comfortable on the feet. He's not out of his element. Like, he's not a fish out of water. And Sean O'Malley has shown instances of being a fish out of water on the ground. Mostly because we don't see him there, because the UFC never gave him anyone to wrestle. Like, who knows? We could have a scenario similar to Stipe in Ngannou 2, where Ngannou stuffs that takedown and everyone in the audience goes, "Oh no!" Everyone had the police, not police academy, Naked Gun moment of like, oh no.
I thought it was that one with the Morgan Freeman sound alike. It was at this moment he knew.
Yeah, he effed up. Yeah. It was pretty scary. I one of the scariest singleton moments in MMA. Stuff in that just.
I have to be honest. When this fight was first announced, and I think we were seeing a lot of people feeling the same way. When you look at the bookmakers' odds, when this fight was announced, I almost instantly thought, "Oh yeah, O'Malley's in a world of trouble here. Merab's just going to grapple with him, take him down multiple times, and eventually break him."
Mm-hmm.
The more I think about it, though, I've watched a lot of Merab's fights. Merab does get caught early in the match.
He's hittable.
He's very hittable. And I think a pinpoint sharpshooter like Sean O'Malley is going to... I can see him definitely catching Merab early in this fight, especially early in the fight. And also as well, Merab isn't a Dagestani smash guy. I think there's one big weakness when it comes to Merab's wrestling is he's good at getting guys down. He's not very good at keeping them there. So O'Malley's going to get more opportunities than normal to try and land that pinpoint shot.
It's really funny because like he's kind of like Petr Yan in that sense, where they're both Sambo practitioners, kind of similar to like a lot of the Dagestani smash guys, but they're like Petr Yan and Merab both have a bad history of guys just popping out of their grappling attempts, like once they get them down. That's kind of funny. It's a funny thing because it made me think of Petr Yan also had that history.
Have you got any concerns as well regarding Merab maybe not being 100%? When you hear about the cut over his eye, when you hear about the rumour that he has staph?
It frightens me, for sure, because I'm an O'Malley hater, admittingly, as like a fan. I'm anti-O'Malley. I'm anti anyone that with Dana White privilege, admittingly. But O'Malley also talks a lot of crap, so it makes it worse. It makes you worried a little bit, but I don't know if it's enough to sway my decision. I think if you look at this fight on paper, if they're both going in at 100%, Merab should win 9 out of 10 times. But it's that 1 in 10 that really makes me nervous here because the stakes are so high, right? Because this fight kind of also tells an interesting story. If Merab wins, this is you get to rewrite history a little bit, or more so confirm conspiracy theories a little bit. If Merab wins in a dominant fashion, it's like they definitely were keeping this guy down, and they definitely were protecting O'Malley with the Cheeto Vera fight, to definitely give him all the edges in the world to be their star, and it just didn't work out. When it finally came for this time for this guy to show up, he did it. If Sean O'Malley wins, it's like the UFC was right to pick this guy as their chosen one. This guy is a star. Who cares if he has 2,000 views in his post-fight interview? If he wins, we're gonna have that scenario. That's a little frightening to me as an anti-establishment guy. That said, though, I don't think any of that changes my pick, my prediction. I pick Merab. I think he 5 rounds him. I don't think 50-45. I think 4-1 is more accurate because I think if Merab survives the first round, he wins. Because he just has to get into the second round because he's a slow starter.
Yeah. I can't help but get the feeling that O'Malley's going to catch him. Just something in my gut says that's what's going to happen. I felt the same way about Aljo. Yeah. So
Aljo, I was worried about too because I was like, Aljo's super hittable.
Yeah.
Aljo's more hittable than Merab, I think.
So hopefully Serra Longo will have learned something from that fight and will hopefully change their approach, change their entry so that sort of pinpoint sharpshooter doesn't connect. I also think as well, one of the reasons as well, like thinking about the wider context of this weight class, another reason why I would like to see Merab win is, I don't know about you, I would be more excited for Merab versus Umar than it would be for Umar versus O'Malley.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I would like to see what one of those Dagestani guys can do when he's got a non-stop wrestler that's just never going to break.
We know what Umar is going to do if he fights O'Malley.
Take him down.
We don't know what's going to happen with Merab there.
Because I think cardio wrestling is one of the ways to beat the Smash Factory. That Volkanovski very nearly did it by just making him work in the grappling.
Yeah, footwork and cardio wrestling was like the key in that fight, and he might have. I think he put the blueprint down, admittingly, for it. It's going to be really interesting in the future as like time's kind of gone on. One thing too, for me, is I'm thinking about this out loud. Is Rob's hittable. Aljamain Sterling was very hittable too, but I also kind of equate Aljo having a little bit of overconfidence and having some bad fight IQ in the O'Malley fight.
And he wasn't 100% either. Like it's obviously come out now that Dana basically coerced him into taking that fight.
I knew it. Yeah, I was like, if I remember right, I didn't want to say it because I couldn't remember. I didn't know if that was my bias remembering a false story, so I didn't want to say it. But another case of Sean O'Malley getting some beneficial treatment. Um, but I think a little bit with that was like bad fight IQ. Like it's like, hey, I'm just gonna reach in for strikes, trying to get him down, and with my chin up in the air. I think Merab is less likely to make bad fight IQ moments uh, than Aljo was. Nothing against Aljo. Aljo was an unbelievable champion, but yeah, I'm sticking with Merab here. I think all signs point to it. There's a lot of questions, but questions make things confusing. I can look at the facts at least and kind of hope that's the most concrete way to find it.
A very philosophical end to the show there, Joe. And that is all the time. That is all the time that we
are intellectuals.
Yeah. That is all the time that we have here on the UFC 306 preview show. I am being bombarded with messages asking how much longer am I going to be. So I think it's the best time for us to wrap it up. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's tuned in. If you do want to support the channel in any way, it's patreon.com/It's Not Cagefighting. A ton of bonus content there. You've got film reviews. You've got INC Uncaged, which is our exclusive series. We also have the chance to watch our content early. Also watch it unfiltered, because obviously we're having to put in a couple of masks to try and avoid being copyright detected by YouTube. Also as well, Joe, you'll also get the first chance to see and also the chance to nominate a retro review of your choice. Now, we don't have any nominees as of yet, so we put it to a public vote for what we're going to be covering in September. With it being Noche UFC, we've got a little bit of a Mexican theme. So, Joe, what were the nominees that people had to choose from? And what will you be covering in a few weeks' time, hopefully?
We put them on up there. I forgot to pull this up. I'm so stupid. I was too busy looking at all the comments of Alexa Grasso on our channel, on the newest channel on the INC, which is the struggles
the
of
strawweight struggles of Alexa Grasso.
Alexa Grasso. Yeah, it's a nice shameless plug to get it going, to cover my own ass. But I know what the winner is. But I want to get the nominations, because that's so because it's because it has a Mexico flair. We decided to go with the fights that have like a Mexico connection, or in Mexico to begin with one of them being, of course, UFC 188, which is Kane versus Fabricio Verdum, one of the bigger, more known fights at Elevation. The other one was, oh no, I almost picked the wrong one. Give me a second. Oh, the other ones were UFC 180, which has Verdum and Mark Hunt. With Marku Huntu make this like really great comeback and get the big belt win. UFC Fight Night, Sergio Pettis versus Brandon Moreno, which it took place in Mexico City.
Champions.
And then you had Randa Marcos and Alexa Grasso, future champion, future all-time great. And then one of the more infamous cards in UFC history, in my opinion, UFC Fight Night, Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stevens, which had Carlos Esparza and Alexa Grasso as the co-main event.
That personally, that got my nomination. That was the one I wanted to cover, because I think that every fight on the main card had some kind of story. And also it's like a good showcase of sort of like the best stars in Mexican MMA, because obviously you had Rodriguez, Grasso, Aldana, Brandon Moreno, I think, was on there as well.
I think so too. I think he fought
Askarov, I think.
Was it Askarov? Isn't it true that his next fight is against Magomedov?
I hope so.
I know. I hope so. I was kind of hoping that one win. I wasn't going to vote for it because I didn't know how I was going to have to do it. But I was kind of having fun with the idea of translating the Spanish in it. At the end going, I'm just not going to say what Yair Rodriguez is saying here. Because he lets out some stuff that if people realize what he was saying, probably would have gotten canceled.
Yeah. But our winner was UFC 188, so that's one of the cards that we will be covering. And the turnaround's going to have to be a fast one as well, Joe, because we have UFC 307, which is coming up in just a few weeks' time. And with the light heavyweight title being on the line, we thought, we've covered Chuck Liddell, we've covered Randy Couture. Let's cover the final part of that great light heavyweight trilogy that basically brought the UFC into the mainstream. So, our event is going to be a classic from the Huntington Beach bad boy himself, Tito Ortiz.
I was actually confused. Whenever you were said, let's make the nominations, I thought you were doing it in anticipation of Megamind 2. Did not know it was for the light heavyweight fight. So because of that, since we're going back and we're not doing Big Head History Month, we had the UFC 25, which had him and Tito Ortiz fighting Vanderlei Silva, two of the more notorious large heads in MMA, colliding. Then it was UFC 30, which was the first Zuffa card, if I remember correctly. Was I remember correctly?
The first Zuffa card, there's in the intro, James Vermey, if you remember him, he speaks to a headed Dana White with hair.
It's astonishing. It's one of those moments where, like, the story of Dorian Gray can't look at his own painting. They say that if Dana looks at that picture of him with hair, he has a similar outbreak.
Someone said, I've never seen Dana look so English.
That's pretty... Okay, I can see it. The next one is UFC 32 with Tito Ortiz taking on Elvis Sinisek, which is... it's all right.
It was never going to win, though.
It was never... Yeah, I was really hoping it didn't win. And what I voted for, and I was excited to happen, is UFC 40, which has him and Ken Shamrock going at it. It is one of the more hilarious feuds of all time, and very... not quite as pivotal as I think UFC 30 is, but it's... or no, let me rephrase. Yeah, UFC 30 is probably more pivotal, but UFC 40 ensured a lot of long-term success.
I know Big John McCarthy speaks very highly about the importance of that fight.
Yeah, I think that fight itself is yes, but I think the event of 30 is more so. But I chose it because of the feud, and also because any chance to talk about how much of a dummy Ken Shamrock is. Like, it's just delightful. Like, he seems like a nice guy now, but a lot of stories I've heard from my family meeting him has been like, man, I'm glad I laughed at him during Tough.
So the poll is still up for that one. There does seem to be quite a clear winner, but you do have plenty of time to maybe try and turn that one around. Joe will be ready to record it in just a few days' time, so please get your vote in. So that's all the time that we have here for the UFC 306 preview show. As mentioned before, we will be back in a few weeks' time for UFC 307 as we count down, hopefully, to what promises to be the greatest title fight in UFC history. I can hear Limp Bizkit playing in the background as we speak. This is the INC. Thank you very much for watching.